God says, kill, kill, kill. You have to kill the Canaanites so you can come in. He tells them, kill them. He talks about genocide. He talks about Holocaust. Kill their children, kill their women, kill their men. Where does evil come from?
It comes from a free will deciding to take a good gift that God has given us and twist it and use it in the wrong way.
But doesn't it say in Isaiah that all things come from God, both good and evil? Doesn't it say in Isaiah that earthquakes and deaths and evil come from him?
No, that the passage about good and evil coming from God, I think if you look at that passage more carefully, it's talking about the judgment of people that you have outlined very accurately.
Well, then,
comes from God. God judges evil, and you're right. And the Old Testament gives us a record of how God judged the Philistines, the Canaanites, the Amorites. Yes.
So you're saying the Bible should be taken interpretively or literally?
Sir, every book you and I read, we interpret.
So it should be taken.
The question is, how do you interpret, right? And so I would plead with you, interpret the Bible the same way you interpret any book. Read in context, respect literary style, ask who's the author, what's the audience, what's the intent of the author, who's the audience the author is addressing, and then interpret fairly.
But what about the revelation of Peter, which today is considered apocrypha, except in the Church of Ethiopia, but back then several bishops, it was considered canonical, and several bishops even attested that it was most likely written by Peter himself, in which there is a verse which is actually very much contested among scholars today that says all people will go to heaven. It says in that verse that the people will look down and see the anguish of the sinners and ask God to forgive them, and God will forgive them out of the goodness of his heart. That's what I lost my train of thought here.
All right, that's good. Great point. All right, now, that's why it's important to study. How were the 27 New Testament books put together? Were they put together by one or two or three or four bishops? Were they put together at a council, like the Council of Nicaea, as Dan Brown argues in the Da Vinci Code? No. The New Testament books were not put together by a council or by a bishop or by a pope. The New Testament was put together by the universal church, and one of the criteria that was used was this book has to be acknowledged universally, not just by a little group of bishops somewhere. It has to be acknowledged universally as reliable and authoritative. Otherwise, it was not included in the New Testament.
What do you mean by universally? There was even
from Rome, Italy, down around to Alexandria, Egypt, the known world.
What about Arianism? That was competing with Catholicism in the beginning of the church. The beginning of the church was not unified; it was split up. You had Arianism. So how could you say universally they accepted all that? There were bishops who argued against the revelation because they considered it a mere fairy tale. And wasn't it during the Council of Nicaea that they actually decided what book goes into the Bible and what does not?
Absolutely no way. The Council of Nicaea had nothing to do with determining the New Testament canon. Nothing. The Council of Nicaea was debating over the identity of Christ, the eternal deity of Christ. That was the issue, not the New Testament canon.
If you say universally, but I'm talking about several bishops, several churches, several branches that actually saw the revelation as not part of it. That's right. Canonical, and others viewed it. But then how can you say it's universal if you have some churches saying this?
I did not say unanimous.
Or you said universal.
Right.
How can you
meaning by that churches around the known world
but not
agreed that this was acceptable, that this came from an apostle or someone who knew an apostle?
But what? Okay, but then I'm talking about Revelation. Some of the churches said no, that's not. They don't view that as canonical. They see that more as a story.
Yes.
While other churches consider Apocrypha, Apocalypse of Peter, which says everyone goes to heaven in the end, they consider that as canonical. How can you say it's universal when you have some churches saying no and others saying yes?
The vast majority of churches around the known world at that time rejected the Gospel of Peter, the Apocrypha of Peter, and they accepted Revelation of John.
So it's not universal, it's the majority, you mean?
That's what I meant. So I'm sorry for my lack of clarity. It was not unanimous, but it was the universal church, meaning by that the church around the world. It was not the church at Antioch or the church at Rome or the church in Jerusalem. It was from Spain down around to Egypt. There was agreement that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were acceptable, authoritative, reliable, and that the Gospel of Peter was not.
And you said earlier about the parallels between the myths or religions and Jesus, and you asked for an example. What about Zoroastrian? Or I can't exactly
Yeah,
pronounce it.
Zoroastrianism, yes?
Yes, that was around 1600 BCE. That was before Christ. That was before Christ ever appeared.
Yeah.
And they spoke, but it has parallels to Christianity. Virgin births, a good God battling evil.
The idea that there is a force of good and a force of evil is very clear. I think you
But how can you explain like the parallels between like miraculous healings or a virgin birth in Zoroastrianism with Christianity? How can you explain those parallels?
well, who's the virgin birth in Zoroastrianism?
Zoroaster or their prophet. I don't exactly remember his name. I think it's Zoroaster or I can't exactly pronounce it. He was he was a prophet, and it was said that he came from a miracle birth from a virgin mother. It was said that he could do miraculous healings. How can you explain those parallelisms?
Well, sir, just because there are miracles in different religions doesn't mean they're all wrong. Just because there are miracles in different religions doesn't mean that one borrowed from the other. If you believe in a supernatural God, you're open to a miracle taking place, right?
But then you're not exactly taking. Okay, you're not. What I'm asking is like, if you take into account the proximity, because Zoroastrianism was in the Middle East, near, and scholars today are mostly in agreement, or at least they're debating it, that it most likely influenced Islam or Judeo-Christian and Islam. It influenced those religions. So how can you say that Christianity is exactly unique when you see all these parallels with religions before? When you see like when scholars today can actually argue that the creation story in the Bible was actually has its roots in Gilgamesh. How you can look at Egyptian religion, the texts of the Egyptian religion, which were thousands of years before Christianity, and had parallels to Jesus' birth and the idea of rebirth and resurrection.
Read the Gilgamesh epic.
I have.
Good. If you conclude that all the Genesis account of the flood is simply a reprint of the Gilgamesh epic, I am dumbfounded. My conclusion would be there really was a great flood, and different cultures tried to explain it in their own language, in their own way. To conclude that there was no flood because we have the Gilgamesh epic and the Genesis account of the flood, I think is unwarranted.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying
What are
that
you
at all.
saying?
I'm asking how you can call Christianity unique. How you can.
Oh, it's very simple.
How you can
because
ignore
Jesus
it.
was an historical person who lived, taught, died, and rose from the dead, and nobody else has risen from the dead historically the way he has.
But then Zoroaster has historical perspectives in that case as well. You have no historical proof outside the Bible. Outside of the Bible, there really isn't
So
much
what?
historical proof of Jesus. You're using one text.
No. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, James, Paul, many different individuals. The New Testament is not written by one person.
But those books were written, I believe, around 6 years after Jesus' death. How exactly can you explain that gap? Like, what exactly happened?
All right. Go right back to the book of Acts, 50 days after the resurrection of Christ. Peter stands up on the street of Jerusalem and says, "You killed the Christ, God raised him from the dead." And people didn't stand there saying, "No, this Christ never existed. No, this Christ never died on a cross." They didn't even say, "No, this Christ didn't rise from the dead."
But you don't have any proof except outside the Bible. You don't have any third-person accounts talking anything about Jesus rising from the dead or Paul doing that. In most of the accounts, in most of the third-party or other accounts, speak of the Christians as a group. You don't see anything. You don't see any text actually saying Jesus or actually being historical.
You think so? Well, then you need to read
Most of-
Josephus, the Jewish historian. He writes about Jesus as an historical person. You need to read the Mishnah.
Doesn't he write it from a third perspective?
You need to read the Mishnah, which is the Jewish commentary on the Torah, which includes very hostile references to Jesus as a magician, as a false prophet. You need to read some of the writings of the Romans who talk about Jesus and followers of this Christ figure as a real person. So there are other documents outside the New Testament Gospels that talk about Jesus as being a real historical person.
I myself accept that Jesus may have been a real person, but you don't really have any text talking about the miracles he does. You don't have any outside text saying he resurrected.
Okay, so is that what you need to believe in Jesus?
If one of the main tenets of Christianity is he rose from the dead so that I may be forgiven, then yes, because if there's no actual proof outside of the Bible, outside of the sacred text that he rose from the dead, how can you exactly count it to be true? It would be the same as saying Muhammad really went to heaven, according to the Quran.
So what you're asking for is someone who saw Jesus risen from the dead, did not believe in him, and wrote about it.
Did not believe in him, but at least wrote it outside of the Bible, wrote it as a third person.
We've just been talking about how the Bible wasn't put together until, gosh, the 300s. So there were many independent authors who wrote about this Jesus having died and risen from the dead.
But then
you
where
have
are
independent attestation.
Where are those independent attestations?
Matthew, Mark,
besides
Luke.
those books.
Well, what prejudice do you have against those books? They're different, unique
They're
books.
all in the Bible.
Well, that wasn't until the 300s.
I'm asking. In the 300s.
When they were first written, they weren't together. You had this document Matthew, you had this document Mark, you had this document Luke, you had this document John, you had this document Romans, and 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. They weren't all in one book. They're different documents. That's exciting. It's fantastic. It's exactly what you're looking for.
What exactly would you characterize sin? What is sin exactly?
You bet. Sin is playing God.
Playing God?
Playing God.
It would not.
Sin is breaking God's moral absolutes.
So breaking his laws.
Sin is not loving God and not loving people. Hating God, hating people, being indifferent to God, being indifferent to people, that is sin.
But
The heart of sin is idolatry. The heart of sin is taking something good or something that's not very good and turning it into the ultimate. For instance, money is good. But to take something good like money and turn it into the ultimate, the reason that I live, that's idolatry. Sin is taking something good, like my mind, a gift from God, making it into the ultimate, being a rationalist and living for my reason. Sin is taking something good, my sexuality, and turning it into the ultimate, living for pleasure, for sexual pleasure. That's hedonism. Those are all different examples of sin. Taking something that could be good or not so good, turning it into the ultimate, and then living for that, instead of living for God and living for people.
So sin wouldn't exactly be disobeying God's laws.
Yeah, sin is disobeying God's laws.
But
Because part of God's laws is, I'm to worship God, I'm not to worship the creation. I'm to worship the Creator, not the creation.
But if you break one of God's laws, would that be considered sin?
Yeah.
But
Because if I break one of God's laws, what I'm saying is, God, I have a better idea on how to live my life than you do.
But God says in the Old Testament, do not kill. But you see him commanding his followers to kill.
No, the commandment is do not murder. The commandment is not do not kill. It's murder.
Okay.
And God doesn't murder.
Okay.
And if any follower of Christ murders, that's sin. But I can promise you, if I and another follower of Christ walk into McDonald's and there's a guy spraying machine gun bullets into little kids' bodies, and if I hit the guy high and my Christian friend hits the guy low and we break his neck in the process and kill him, that is not murder, sir.
Okay, so
that is killing motivated by a drive to preserve the innocent from being slaughtered. That's ethically different from murder. Murder is me killing someone because of selfishness, hatred, or revenge.
Okay, well then that proves my point when he tells them to kill the women and children to drive out the Canaanites. Killing them, isn't that ethically wrong?
Okay, you're thinking well. Good point. No. When God chooses to judge a nation, a people group, innocent people get swept up in that judgment.
So as long as God says that genocide and Holocaust is okay.
No.
But that's
God
not
is
exactly
choosing
what he
to
said.
judge people groups for what they did wrong. And because we're more interconnected than we would like to admit, innocent people were swept along in the judgment.
For what they
He
did.
did not hire a guy to go in there and just wipe out evil adults.
You mean living? You mean by being wrong or doing wrong? You mean by living in a certain area and having a different belief and culture as his, as theirs.
If you do evil, I don't care what
tells-
culture you're in,
he
you are
tells-
responsible to God for that evil, and He will hold you accountable.
He tells the Israelites to kill men, women, children, to commit murder to the women and children because he had to. Because he says because they have different beliefs than you, because you must
No,
drive
it is
them out.
not because they have different beliefs. False.
He says because they have
It is
false
because
gods.
it is because they have done evil. They have sacrificed their babies on altars, calling that an act of worship. They have taught people that the way to know God is to have sex with a temple prostitute. And God judged those cultures for the slaughter, the way they slaughtered their innocent children, and for the way they taught people that the way to know God was to have sex with a temple prostitute.
Isn't that intolerant of their culture? That's their.
No,
You have
it's intolerant of evil.
you have cultures today that have headhunting, where the only way to become a man is to kill another man.
That's evil.
That's intolerant of their culture. That's basically saying no because according to my culture, my religion, that's wrong. Isn't that being intolerant?
I can promise you that if you rescue a fellow Homo sapien from being cannibalized by a headhunter, that is good. And if you go into that situation and say, I'm sorry, it's all relative, and if this group of men wants to eat this guy's head, go right ahead, it's just fine because it's your culture,
But no,
that's
but
very
because
sad.
But that's because it's my own culture. My own culture is not to see that, which means as following my own culture, I should stop that. But I'm still pointing out, like, you're saying God is saying to be tolerant when He shows in the Old Testament to be very, very intolerant of other people. When He tells them if they curse God, kill them. If they don't believe in God, kill them.
Killing Jews came from eugenics, from social Darwinism that teaches that some people are a superior level of the evolutionary cycle, and these Jews and gypsies and homosexuals are an inferior level of the evolutionary cycle. Therefore, to help Nazi Germany move forward, we need to execute homosexuals, gypsies, and Jews. That is the philosophical basis for the Holocaust.
Darwinism came around the early 1900s, late 1800s, I believe.
1859, Darwin wrote Origin of the Species.
Yes, so socialists. But you had anti-Semitism before Darwin. You had anti-Semitism in the Middle Ages.
Absolutely. You had anti-Semitism in the first century.
One of the ideas of anti-Semitism was that they killed Jesus.
Agreed. We agree. Obviously, there's been too much anti-Semitism that has been fueled by an idea that the Jews killed Christ, so we're going to go after the Jews. But I can promise you, that is not what fueled the Nazi Holocaust. When you study Nazism and Hitler, what fueled the Nazi Holocaust was eugenics, racial superiority. Why? Because the clear belief was evolution.
Because
We have evolved to higher levels. And the clear Nazi teaching was blacks, Jews, gypsies, and homosexuals, and handicapped people are inferior levels of the evolutionary cycle. That is the justification for wiping them out.
they saw that, except going back to right and wrong being relative, they saw that as right. If Nazis controlled the world today, that would be right.
And they would be wrong, I'm convinced. What about you? You
But
think they'd
that's-
be wrong or not?
That would be relativism.
No. Well, yeah,
If the
what you're
Nazis-
espousing is
If the
relativism,
Nazis control the world today,
right?
killing Jews, blacks, anyone non-Aryan or
Right,
non-white,
non-Aryan.
that would be considered right. That would be considered culturally right, and they would see it as fact.
And I
that
would
they
contradict
are superior.
it. And I would hope you'd contradict it. Not because we're enlightened Westerners, but because we have consciences and rational minds that enable us to understand that that is absolutely wrong. I don't care how many people say it's right. I don't care whether my culture says it's right or not.
But then it's relative. It's coming from your own subjective viewpoint.
No, it's coming from a conviction that the human conscience enables us to tie into an objective moral.